Okay, 2 review problems up at the top. Go ahead. I'll give you like 20 seconds. That's all you should need. Okay, so I like seeing x's. X's I know I can solve, right? Those are just linear equations that we worked on last semester, excuse me. So I'm just looking at opposite operations. So what is the opposite operation of 2x? I would divide, right? 2x is multiplication, so I would just divide each side by 2. 0 divided by 2 is still 0, so I get x equals 0. And then for x plus 1, I would just subtract 1 from both sides, and x equals negative 1. Those are pretty easy. And if I remember right, we talked about this at the very beginning of factoring. We talked about the point of factoring. Remember, the point of factoring is to take something that's complicated and break it down into its simplest parts. And the reason that we like to break it down into its simplest parts is because it makes things like this very easy to solve. Okay, if I look at example 1 and example 2. So let me just pull this over to the side really quick. What if I gave you x times y equals 0? What could make this true? Either the x or the y could be 0. Technically, both of them could be 0. Okay, but either the x or the y could be 0, because if this x is 0, 0 times anything is 0. And on the flip side, if y is 0, 0 times anything is still 0. So if I see things that are multiplied together equaling 0, that means any of those parts that are being multiplied together could be 0. And that would make the whole thing true. Okay? So that's the general idea of what we're looking at here. So if I look at example 1, I see 2 different parts to this that are being multiplied together. I see 2x times this set of parentheses. So that means in order for this whole thing to be 0, either 2x could be 0 or x plus 1 could be 0. Because I'm multiplying, so instead of x times y, this is 2x times x plus 1. Those are the 2 pieces, right? In order for this whole thing to be 0, either this part could be 0 or this part could be 0. Because if this part is 0, this times 0 times anything would be 0. If this part was 0, 0 times anything would still be 0. Okay? So I'm just solving these 2 equations separately. So now I do just like I did up above. Divide by 2, divide by 2, x is 0. Minus 1, minus 1, x is negative 1. So there are actually 2 answers to most of our problems. Almost all of our problems that have an x squared in them, x squared almost always means there will be 2 answers. Okay, almost always means there will be 2 answers. Okay, so example 2, somebody give me one part that could be 0. Good, x plus 3. So x plus 3 could be 0 because that's one set of parentheses. What's another part that could be 0? X minus 2. So x minus 2 is my other set of parentheses, so that could also be 0. So solve these 2 separately. Subtract 3. So x could be negative 3 and add 2. X could be positive 2. All right, 2, try these problems down below. Actually, 3, try these problems down below. Just do A and B. Actually, no, go ahead and do A, B, and C. Go ahead. Okay, so A, let me zoom in here. A, my 2 different pieces. Remember, a piece sitting out in front of the parentheses is a separate piece. They just don't put it in parentheses if it's only a single term. So that means 5x could be 0, meaning x is 0. Or the other piece, x minus 10, could be 0, meaning x is positive 10 once I do my opposite operation. Okay? So a lot of these have 2 different answers. If I look at B, x plus 2 could be 0, meaning x is negative 2. Or x minus 8 could be 0, meaning x is positive 8. Time out, time out. Okay, and then lastly C, x minus 4 could be 0, so x is 4. X plus 7 could be 0, so x is negative 7. Okay, So that's all we're learning today, but let's look at one more example just to make sure we are clear. Let's look at example 3. Whoa, I missed it. There it is. How does example 3 look different than the problems we've done before? There's no parentheses. I see x squared. All of these things should hint to you that what?
It's about to go down.
No, it is not about to go down. All of these things, so no parentheses, and x squared should hint to you that... Oh, AC, so it's not been factored. Right? So the point of factoring is to break it down into its simplest parts and then be able to solve. The only thing we're learning today is the solving part, so you guys should already know how to factor. Okay, but I'm not going to give you problems that are already factored.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Okay. So essentially all we need to do is do our factoring methods first. So you might want to put yourself some notes over on the side here. Factor first. Solve last. Okay, factor first, solve last. When do we solve? When do we know we have to solve versus just factor? There's an equal 0 or equal sign just in general. So this tells me I must solve. So essentially, until we factor it, we're just ignoring that equal 0 for now. We know that means solve, but I have to factor it before I can solve. So let's go ahead and factor. So work through your factoring rules. Try a GCF. Is there any GCF, anything that divides out of 5, 16, and 12?
Yes.
1. Yeah, 1 doesn't help us. Is there a variable I can take out of all of them?
X. No.
12 does not have an X, right? So there is no GCF, so I move forward to looking at how many terms I have. I am not counting the equal 0 as a term, okay? In the part that I'm trying to factor, or how many terms do I have?
Yep. 3.
We have 3 terms, which means I need to do the AC method, right? So I do A times C, so 5 times 12 gives me 60x squared. Remember, the goal of the AC method is to break it into 4 terms so that I can group. So I need a list of potential factors, and my list of potential factors comes from that 60x squared. So I need factors of 60x squared. Remember, I can list through them if I want to. 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, yada, 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 all those. But I'm looking for the pair that will break my middle term apart. So they need to add up to be that middle term. So what numbers multiply to 60 that also add to 16? 10 and 6.
Or not.
She answered. Thank you, though. So I have 6x and 10x. Remember, all my factors, in order to get that x squared, I need my x's. If you cannot think about it right off the bat, you can always list your factors. Don't be scared of that, okay? There will be problems that you come to that are too difficult to try to think about, and you can just list your factors out, okay? But if you can think about it like that, it doesn't hurt, okay? All right, so once I find that pair of factors, all I'm doing is breaking this middle term apart. So 5x squared stays the same. 16x becomes plus 6x plus 10x. And my plus 12 stays the same. Don't forget to bring down your equal 0 so you remember to solve at the end. Now that I have 4 terms, what do I do?
Yeah,
Group. So group the first 2. Anything I can divide out of 5 and 6? No. Any x I can take out? Yeah, I can take an x out. So bring an x out.
Are we allowed to flip them?
The factors? Yeah, sure. Okay, so I bring an x out. 5x squared divided by 5x is 5x. 6x divided by x is plus 6. Anything I can divide out of 10 and 12?
No. Just skip them.
2. So plus 2. 10x divided by 2 is 5x. 12 divided by 2 is plus 6. Do my parentheses match? Yes, so I have grouped correctly. I can bring out 5x plus 6. And when I factor 5x plus 6 out, I'm left with x plus 2. Am I done?
No.
I'm done factoring.
Now you just have to solve.
Now I gotta solve, right? Because that equals 0 there, so now I have to solve.
Genius.
So this stuff here tells me, and I'm gonna pull it over here so that I can do it over here because I'm running out of room over there. Tells me that 5x plus 6 could be 0. Or on the flip side, x plus 2 could be 0. Okay, so 5x plus 6 could be 0 or x plus 2 equals 0, so just solve these two separately. Don't be scared of a two-stepper. Okay, subtract 6. 5x equals negative 6. Divide by 5. X equals negative 6/5. Just leave it a fraction. Okay, subtract 2 from both sides. And x is negative 2.
It's easy, but it's a lot of work.
All you got to do is just break it down in your head. First you have to find the factors and break it apart, right? So find the factors, break it apart. Once you break it apart, then you're just grouping. You know how to group, so just focus on grouping. And once you get done grouping, all you have to do is solve, and solving is easy. You all said that in the beginning. Solving's easy. You all said solving's easy, you've all said grouping's easy, and you've all said breaking it apart is easy. So just put all three of those together. Don't make it hard. Just break it down into parts. It is a lot of work. It is. Okay? Let's practice a little bit. There are 3. Try these problems down at the bottom. Go ahead and do A, B, and C together in your groups. Go ahead. Hey, can I ask you a quick question? Pause. Everybody pause for a second. How many people, be honest with me, are multiplying 18 times negative 30 right now?
Not me.
Yeah, you were saying.
No.
What are you talking about?
You're working too hard. What did we talk about in the very beginning? What's our factoring rule? What's our factoring rule number 1? Try a GCF. Does anything divide into 18, 30, 3, and 30?
3.
Yeah, 3 does. So I'm going to kind of amend my problem here, take out the GCF. Don't forget to leave the GCF in, though. So it's going to be 6m squared plus 11m minus 10. Okay? Now your AC will be a lot smaller than 18 times 30. All right, I'll let you keep going. So I bring out a 2m, and I'm left with 3m minus 2. Out of the last 2, I bring out a 5, so plus 5. And I'm left with 3m minus 2. So my parentheses match, so 3m minus 2 comes out. 2m plus 5 is left over. Don't forget I'm equaling 0, and don't forget about your GCF. Because now, how many terms or how many parts does my factored form have? That's 3 parts, right? Has 1 part right here. That's the GCF. 1 part inside this parenthesis, 1 part inside this parenthesis. So I have 3 equations that I'm setting up. For the solving part, 3 is equal to 0. 3m minus 2 is equal to 0. And 2m plus 5 is equal to 0. So could 3 equal 0? Ever? No. If it was 3x, that would be a different story, right? But 3 equals 0 will never give me an answer, so I'm done with that. That doesn't give me an answer. I just solved these 2 that I have left. So plus 2, divide by 3, and I get m equals 2/3. Minus 5, divide by 2, and m equals negative 5/2. So there are my 2 answers, 2/3 and negative 5/2. Any questions? Okay. And C. AC is 9v squared. The factors of 9v squared that adds up to negative 10 in the middle would be negative 1v and negative 9v. So again, if you don't need to list out all your factors, that's fine. But if you ever get stuck, list out your factors. Don't be lazy. List out your factors. Okay? So 3v squared comes down. That middle negative 10v breaks into minus 1v, minus 9v. The plus 3 comes down, and my equal 0 comes down, so I don't forget to solve. Group the first two together, all I can bring out is a v, and I'm left with 3v minus 1. Out of the last two, I'm going to have to bring out a negative 3 for them to match. So negative 9 divided by negative 3 is positive 3v, and 3 divided by negative 3 is negative 1 or minus 1. So make sure your parentheses match. If you have, or if they don't match, make sure you go back and fix your groupings. So 3v minus 1 comes out, and I'm left with v minus 3. So that means 3v minus 1 could be 0. So add 1, divide by 3, and I get v equals 1/3 for one answer. Or the other set of parentheses, v minus 3 could be 0, meaning v is positive 3. Okay. Do we have any questions? Can I get a comfort level where you're at? Be honest with me. Okay. All right.